Can a penalty be technically correct, but completely unfair? What happens when the rules collide with reality on the track? Today I reveal to you how a 10-second penalty on Lewis Hamilton in Mexico 2025 has caused an earthquake in F1, and how the FIA itself contradicted itself when justifying it. From the very start, it was clear that it was not going to be a smooth race. The first meters of the GP were true chaos, with 4 cars Norris, Leclerc, Hamilton and Verstappen lined up in parallel heading to the first corner. No one wanted to give in, and the space simply didn't exist for everyone to survive that first sequence without incident. It was here that the first signs of inconsistency began to appear. Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen chose to go straight, completely cutting turns 1, 2 and 3, crossing the grass to rejoin the track later. Despite having momentarily benefited from these maneuvers, both quickly returned positions to avoid sanctions. In contrast, Hamilton was the only one among the 4 leaders who managed to stay within the limits of the track during that initial sequence, but he paid a high price. He started in 3rd position behind his teammate, whom, according to onboard images, he had completely overtaken at the apex of turn 1 before Charles launched himself without space. Hamilton's frustration was instantly heard on the radio. Not only had he respected the track, but he was overtaken by someone who didn't. That feeling of injustice was the seed of what would later explode in lap 6. By that time, the tension between Hamilton and Verstappen was already evident. Both knew that the fight for the podium involved surpassing the other, and they were racing to the limit. On lap 6, Max launched an aggressive attack on the inside of turn 1. There was slight contact between both cars. Although the maneuver was investigated by the stewards, it was ruled a racing incident under the argument that Verstappen's front axle was in front of Hamilton's mirror, which, according to the FIA, gave him the right to the trajectory. The maneuver left Verstappen with excess speed that forced him to go straight again, cutting through the grass in turns 2 and 3 and rejoining the track. Once again without penalty. This was the second time in just 6 laps that Max went off the track without consequences. The accumulation of these decisions began to generate a feeling of favoritism, that there were different rules for different names. And that feeling would be crucial in what would come next. Because when Hamilton tried to hit back on the back straight, going outside of Verstappen at turn 4, everything fell apart. He blocked tires, missed the braking point and ended up cutting through the grass, heading straight into turn 5. At that moment, cameras captured him returning to the track in front of Verstappen. What seemed to be a logical action in race conditions, given the speed and braking point, would soon become the epicenter of one of the most controversial penalties of the year. Up to this point, there was no clearly purposefully gained advantage. It was a reaction to a sequence of aggressive maneuvers, errors on both sides and extreme decisions in the heat of a fight for important positions. But what differentiated this incident from the previous ones was that, this time, the FIA did not let it go. And he did so with an explanation that, far from clarifying, ended up intensifying the controversy. The document that changed everything arrived a few hours after the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix. Under the title Decision of the Stewards Document 36, the FIA published the official resolution that justified the 10-second penalty imposed on Lewis Hamilton. What should have been a clear and technical explanation ended up being a text that left more questions than answers. Because within those few lines, a paradox was hidden that unleashed a storm of criticism. The Federation, without intending it, had just recognized that its own regulations were incapable of dealing with the dynamic reality of a modern Formula One race. According to the steward's report, Hamilton had left the track at turn 4 after a brake lockup that forced him to use the grass-covered escape area. At that point, the FIA makes it clear that the driver of car 44 did not violate the race director's notes. That is, he did not deliberately ignore the designated escape route, the famous yellow line, because he was going too fast to safely merge across it. This point is absolutely key, because for the first time in a long time, the stewards recognized that the technical situation on the track prevented compliance with a rule to the letter, and that, in any elite sport, should be enough to rule out a sanction. But the problem came immediately afterwards. In the same document, after exonerating Hamilton for not following the designated trajectory, the FIA argues that the driver did gain a lasting advantage by rejoining the track ahead of Verstappen without returning the position. Here the fatal contradiction is born, because they are punishing a pilot for a direct consequence of a maneuver that they themselves recognize could not be avoided. This creates a legal vacuum, a gray area in the regulations, where an action justified in its execution becomes punishable by its result. This duality provoked an immediate wave of indignation. Experts, former drivers and analysts were quick to point out that the sanction was not consistent with the criteria that the FIA itself had established in the past. And what is even more worrying, that the same type of maneuver, leaving the track due to a hand-to-hand fight and rejoining with an advantage, had been tolerated by other drivers that same weekend without consequences. We saw it at the start with Leclerc and Verstappen, and again on lap 6 with Max himself, who also cut the chicane after a risky maneuver and returned without returning position or receiving punishment. The question that hung in the air was inevitable. Why did Hamilton yes and not the others? The answer, if it exists, was not in the document. The FIA did not explain why Verstappen's reinstatement was not sanctioned, nor why Leclerc's advantage at the start was ignored. He only decided, in this specific case, to apply a severe penalty, ignoring the multiple circumstances that preceded Hamilton's action. Furthermore, the way in which the sanction was communicated increased the controversy. Ferrari received the notification 5 laps after the incident, when there was no real margin for Hamilton to regain the position without losing many more. That delay turned a possible correction on the track, as had been allowed to other drivers, into an automatic and unresolved penalty. The subsequent statements by Fred Vasseur, head of Ferrari, left no room for doubt. He accused the FIA of refereeing with double standards and questioned the lack of consistency in the application of the regulations. Hamilton, for his part, expressed his disbelief and frustration on the radio, not only because of the punishment, but because he felt that the system was designed to leave him without options. The contradiction was served. The FIA claimed that Hamilton did the right thing by not taking the escape route, but then penalized him for the consequences of that same action. This dilemma exposes a structural conflict that F1 has not yet resolved. How to balance the cold letter of the regulations with the changing reality of a track, where milliseconds and decisions and fractions of time can have enormous implications. Instead of offering clarity, the FIA had dug a deeper hole. One that calls into question their ability to judge impartially, and that threatens to erode the confidence not only of the teams, but of the millions of fans who follow the championship. Because when the rules do not apply equally to everyone, they stop being rules. And what remains is arbitrariness. Lap 6 of the Mexican Grand Prix was the turning point. Until that point, the battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen had been intense, but still within the limits of what can be considered a fair and competitive duel. However, what happened in that turn not only defined the outcome of the race for both drivers, but brutally exposed the inconsistencies of the FIA sanction system. It all started on the long straight after turn 3, one of the fastest areas of the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. Hamilton, with good traction at the exit of the last chicane, stuck to the rear wing of Verstappen's Red Bull. It was the perfect time to launch an attack. He used DRS, opened to the left side of the track, and prepared the maneuver to brake on the outside in turn 4. Verstappen, aware that the Ferrari was coming at greater speed, defended aggressively. At the critical moment of braking, Hamilton blocked his right front tire. This small technical error was enough to destabilize his line and pushed him off the track. Here the controversial sequence begins. Hamilton, unable to stop the car in time, was forced to use the loophole. But he did not do so following the path that the FIA had marked as a safe re-entry, a trajectory that requires a sharp turn to the left, surrounding an area of bollards, but rather he went diagonally across the grass to re-enter the track directly between turns 4 and 5. The decisive factor. The speed he was traveling was such that any attempt to take the alternative route would have resulted in a total loss of control or even an accident. The interesting thing is that the moment Hamilton returned to the asphalt, he did so just ahead of Verstappen. But with an important nuance. Max, who had also gone long and had crossed the grass in turn 2 a few meters before, rejoined the track without losing positions. In fact, he had gained time with that cut, but he was not sanctioned. It was the second time in 6 laps that Verstappen left the track without consequences. He did it at the start, he did it on this lap, and on both occasions the marshal system determined that his maneuver was part of the normal chaos of the race. This is the context in which Hamilton's sanction takes on a much more serious nuance. Because it was not an isolated action, far from it. It was the 3rd track closure incident among the leading drivers in just 6 laps. And yet, he was the only one punished. This sets up the narrative of double standards, that criteria vary depending on the driver, the situation, or even the team involved. But let's get back to the technical. The FIA alleged that Hamilton rejoined with a durable lead because he emerged ahead of Verstappen and did not give back the position. What was not explained and is a crucial detail is that at the exact moment Hamilton returned to the track, Oliver Bearman, the Haas driver, also overtook Verstappen on that same straight. That is, Verstappen lost pace due to his own previous maneuver, not exclusively due to Hamilton's reinstatement. In fact, if we look at the available telemetry, the Ferrari did not accelerate significantly more than other cars on the grass area. He simply had a better exit from the cut due to inertia and the absence of traffic. In addition, we must consider the nature of the Mexican grass. It is not artificial or flat like in other modern circuits. It is irregular, it has undulations, and crossing it diagonally at high speed does not represent a technical advantage. The car jumps, loses traction, and compromises stability. How can you gain a lasting advantage on a stretch where car control is minimal and the risk of losing time is real? This is where the FIA's decision seems even more disconnected from the reality of the track. Penalizing for an advantage that is, at the very least, debatable without taking into account the exact circumstances at the time, including traffic, blocked tires, lack of space to follow the rejoining protocol, and the behavior of other drivers demonstrates dangerous regulatory rigidity. Do you want us to develop in a future video what urgent changes the FIA should implement to avoid future controversies like this? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.